My name is Elena Manferdini. I'm the graduate program chair at SciArc, and you're now here in my office, Atelier Manferdini, which is a small architectural boutique office in Venice, California. I actually come to architecture from the field of engineering. My education for my undergraduate was architectural engineering in Italy, and I came to UCLA as a graduate student with a scholarship, and the scholarship was from the engineering department, and I entered in architecture a bit because I needed to take some classes there to fulfill my requirements, and I realized how creative and fun profession it was. And so that is the way I arrived to the field. It was more by chance, I think, because I was missing some classes that I was taking in the UCLA architectural department. And I realized how good the architectural department was at that point. Sylvia Levin was the chair, and she invited great architects and designers. And I thought architecture is a creative field that is going to keep me engaged for my entire life. It was my first time in the United States when I came here at 22. And I did not expect Los Angeles to be the way it was. I think it was a different environment in terms of education and in terms of lifestyle, and for sure in terms of weather and what architecture means in Los Angeles, or what architecture means in Bologna, where I'm coming from. I think both educations from my Italian background and the American life that I built here for myself are very important to the production I have of architecture today, and they're very different and sometimes opposite. But I do believe that this historical environment, really, in which I grew up, has had a strong impact on my education, even though maybe I didn't know at that time how lucky I was to grow up in Italy, in cities where architecture and history is still at work. I mean, I lived in houses that had 1,000 years old, with frescoes and beautiful artifacts, which I did not realize how rare and beautiful actually is to be able to take this for granted. On the other hand, Los Angeles was offering, I think, a new kind of architecture, formalism, technology, forward thinking, experimentation, which also was exciting when I came here. It seemed to be something I missed and something that was worth pursuing and being part of. I think Los Angeles is a place where architecture is still in motion. Which is an exciting place to be if you're an architect that wants to build. Whereas in many ways, Italy is a place where architecture is still active, but is active more as architecture that has been built many centuries ago is still active, you still live in it, and it's still interesting to see how it performs. But there are definitely two different practices, the one you can have in Italy or the one you can have here, in terms of the scope and expansion of what architects can do and can build. I think probably in Italy, for me, architecture was more of a passive activity, the one of enjoying the beauty around me. And I think everybody that comes to Italy finds this, which I call the postcard effect, of realizing that your ideals of what a historical city is can actually exist and can be lived in. But the United States has offered a much dynamic and free way of thinking, and the level of experimentation that is possible here, the level of trust you get here from clients and environments is much higher, I think. So today I find my practice to be completely inactive here in the United States in general. I go back to Italy periodically to visit my family. Everybody's there. And I think this is something that probably resonates with anybody who is foreigner. When you come to the United States, there is still a very strong place in your heart for where you come from. When you're a foreigner, this will always remain. And probably the time after school is the one where you really are confronted with these questions the most. Should I go back? Should I take what I learned and then go back to my country and have this activate the work Italians architects do? And I do think that that has been an option for me and has been in my mind for a long time. Time passes, your connections and your family become the one you live in. And so nowadays, definitely my most impetus is to be in Los Angeles and where I am in a community that I built. Also, I think for me, a strong tie to the city is SCI-Arc. It's a school where I taught for 18 years. Now I'm the graduate chair. I've been investing quite a bit of my life in a community that I believe in. It's a strong, self-confident community that nurtures design. And I think those schools don't happen everywhere. Those positions don't open up everywhere. It takes a city like Los Angeles that is a work in progress, that is an experimental city, for a school like that to exist. And my life is very much ingrained with academia. And so that would be very hard to reproduce anywhere else. There are very few institutions around the world that have that level of fearlessness, I think, that SCI-Arc has, both in terms of administration and students. And that is rare to find. I think we all have work we look at and people that we consider to be mentors. And they've changed in my life, but probably the most important ones when I was in school were, I think, Sylvia Levin and Greg Lynn. Sylvia Levin was the chair of the department of UCLA, and I think she has been someone who I've been in contact many years. Her faith in me, giving me scholarships, has changed my career. So I would be forever in debt to her for her generosity to support my education. And Greg Lynn, I think, was a person I worked for a few years after school. And his way of seeing technology and innovation, I think, has found in me, has resonated in me for my practice as well. So I think those first steps into the profession and into the academic world, in Los Angeles, were very meaningful to me. I think in time you create a set of connections and a set of practices on your own. I could even say that SCI-Arc itself is a mentor to me, if that is possible to say about an institution. Because after 18 years in an institution, you realize that your professional practice grows hand in hand with a series of people that allow you to expand your capacity. So architecture is never an individual journey. We imagine to be an individual journey, that there is this single person, which is the architect, that has a vision for the many. In reality, that is not the case. We are part of a cultural endeavor, and I think I could imagine the school to be one of my mentors, because you look at many people around you whose career you understand. They challenge you to think differently about what you do. There is somewhat a mix between your work and their work, even the students' work. All of this is breathing into each other. Also, there are practices that you look at from far away. Maybe you don't know personally that well the architects, but whose work or writing is important, and those have been changing through my life. There is always this never-ending wanderlust of looking at architecture that you think it's impressive and changes your understanding what architecture before was. And for sure, those have been many in my life, too many to mention. And I also want to hope that they will still keep on changing. My mentors, the things I look at, and the scale of the work I do as well. I think there is a word I like to say that one could understand as being negative, and I understand as being positive. Architects are generalists, which is something that everybody says, why are you saying this? Why? It's a very specific profession, it's specific what we do. And I think this is tied to the idea that SCI-Arc is a school of architectural thinking. It's because architecture as a profession is a wide endeavor. You could imagine architects working on many skills, on many kind of designs. Specializing yourself is something that maybe sometimes becomes important for a company to do. But in reality, the education is expansive. and has always been expansive. I think architecture has been always looking outside its own boundaries to find methods, creative inputs, ways of construction, different kind of imagination. This has been, I think, the history of architecture from centuries and centuries ago. It's a habit to be cultural animals and to be sensitive to what happens around us. And sometimes this means to go besides and beyond the boundaries of what we consider to be architecture. And some people are worried about saying that. They think, well, architecture is equal building. So as architectural schools, you should teach how to build buildings. And what about cities? And what about exhibitions? And what about interiors? And what about industrial design? They think, oh, that's design, that's different. There's something that is called architecture, and then there's something that is called design. I think SciArc has been very nimble about those two definitions and understands that architecture, yes, is a framework. It's almost a structure, a geometrical way of seeing the world. It's like you put in some glasses and you start seeing things in an abstract way. But that things you're seeing could be very different. We have students and faculty whose practice is much different than the one of just building projects, meaning building projects as building. They understand projects as the scale of the body. They understand project as the scale of a book or an exhibition or a chair or etc. And each of them have a framework, a desire to contribute to the disciplinary body of work. And I think that's very important. So you could imagine that SciArc is a place where you have that framework, but the framework is flexed into different fields of design and also in different scale of design. And it even jumps into other fields. We have programs that work with film. We have programs that work with the city. We have programs that work with landscape and nature and understanding of that. So I think when you think of SciArc, you think of a place where you can expand the boundaries of what maybe a more traditional understanding of architecture is. I mean, and there are other schools that did that, I think. The Bauhaus, the idea that an architect could and should design from the spoon to the city. I think this is part of almost an understanding that as architects, we do understand we have a comprehensive, expansive, generalist education. That also is the beauty of architecture, that you can change what you do and every project is different and every step of the way you change. And I think that is not something to be afraid of, but somehow I think is what makes this profession attractive. What you do, for instance, with these videos. You are an architect and you understanding that collecting the intellectual capital of architecture through movies, it is a project. It is an architectural project. I find that interesting. I find that's completely part of what the SciArc mission is. No, it's an editorial project, the one you're doing. And I think that is an architectural project. I firmly believe that SciArc is not anymore a regional school. At the beginning it was. And nowadays it is an international community. And I believe that that is a richness, as a cultural richness. We have students from 50 countries coming to SciArc to study. And also the faculties are in many ways from other countries. They're also from the United States, but there is a ratio of domestic and international that makes the international contribution to the school quite important. One cannot imagine, I think today, in our global economy and culture to think of a school as a closed environment. This is not anymore a regional school, nor should be. It is a school that attracts the most talents that there is out there, regardless of where it comes from. And I think the capacity and the ability to do that, I think, is a great one, because I think SciArc goes and breaks the schemes of what is an academic career. What are the requirements to have an academic career? What is the path towards that? Which makes it attractive to practitioners, designers, thinkers, history theory critics to come to a school like SciArc, because it is in motion and it is exciting to be part of it, both in terms of the student body and in terms of the faculty that we can hire. It is not constrained by many of the academic requirements that other schools task their faculty with, which allows them to practice in a different level, allows them to be more experimental with what they do in the school, and doesn't stop them into extenuating tenure track projects that might really change and shift the career of an architect towards things that they're not interested in. I truly believe that fostering each student and each faculty true talent and interest is a very important thing to do as a leader, because that is the seed of excellence of the school. So, and that I think is what makes the school attractive to people from everywhere. The idea of having a practice has been always in me. Even before I knew that I was an architect, I knew I would have had my office. I think there's something that you know since you're very young, that you want to lead your own endeavor. And then what that is comes with age, but that there is an idea of having your own business. This was always part of my ambition. And my office came before I even had a position as an instructor. I mean, it becomes natural that when you have your own office, you start teaching, or vice versa, because they go hand in hand. You have more time, more flexibility, rather than when you work for somebody else. But it's been always clear to me that my office is something that I will always have and continue to have for my entire life, because it's where the seeds of my creativity start, and where most of the interests that I have can be expressed in the way I desire them to be. School and office are complementary in many ways. It's clear that the talent that comes from great talent students then comes into my office, and vice versa. The things that I think in the office, I bring to the school to get a deeper understanding of what the project is. So those things come together. Usually, when I'm not in COVID, my days are mornings are usually in the office, and every other day I am in school. Now that I'm the chair of SciArc, this is much more time in terms of administration, which, by the way, I love. So I also discover that doing this job. So you'll also learn that things that you didn't know about yourself through doing them. And my day is, talking to clients, talking to my staff, directing and reviewing the work, and then in the afternoon going to school, talking to my students, and doing probably the same thing. I think the office is truly a multidisciplinary and truly a multi-scalar production. And so right now in the office we have projects that range from ground up in Los Angeles of housing to jewelry. I mean, this is actually one of my pieces. So it truly, the scale is wide. I would say that there is something that is more consistent in the work, which is public artwork. We work with many public administrations to produce artwork for projects. Usually it's site-specific, usually occupies a facade of buildings or lobbies. So it's a place where I think creativity, conceptual art, and architectural scale come together, which is, I think, something that we are very interested in. What is the power of design and art when it's scaled up to the level of a facade or a public project? And what is the relationship with the audience? And how can art contribute to architecture and vice versa? So that relationship, I think, is probably the one that is the most important for the practice, and is where most of the energy is spent. I think there is fascination of the office towards facades and canvases in general, painterly canvas. The subject matter of those canvases have changed through the professional production of the work. It can go from the understanding of nature, of digital nature, to patterns and geometry and optical effects. There is clearly in every single project a tendency to create an experience in looking. So there is a tendency to look for the optical effect and create images canvases, facades, and spaces that engage the audience into a deeper activity of seeing space and a sense of wonder of what you're seeing. And this goes not only in terms of subject matter, which is usually digital, but also the methodology of construction. Usually it's mirrors or augmented reality on top of a physical manifestation, use of glass, use of materials and ceramic, things that actually have a sense of finish and qualities that you can operate onto. I think it's hard for me to compare Europe in general to United States. I've never really worked in Europe in the way I've worked in United States. I actually think in terms of what you can do in Italy, I would say that it's much more possible to have a practice in United States than in Italy. So I think you're referring to South America much more than what the situation in Italy is. I would say that yes, United States has a high standard of bureaucracy and license path towards building. I don't necessarily think it's a good or a bad thing, but it's true that there's a different level of faith in what education can give you. So if education in the United States is much more creative, then the licensing exams is where certain technical knowledge is given or is performed. Whereas in education in Europe is much more technical. So maybe there's less freedom in terms of design experimentation or what you're taught, but you are taught to be an architect. And so the path towards licensing exams is much faster. So definitely this is a strong difference between the educational system in the United States and the one that I know of in Europe. It's hard to tell what your career could and should have been in another country. But I think in the United States, I had the ability to craft what I wanted my career to be. I'm not sure if that would have been the case in Italy, yes. It is definitely a cultural hub, Los Angeles, for architecture. I think there are many cultural hubs like this one, but for sure Los Angeles is one of those. There are a few schools of architecture in LA. Also, there are incredible architects that have been part of the academic world. And their gravitas, the kind of work they've done in the city and the level of connection that they with the university, the fact that they hire students from universities to enter their office creates, I think, a very cohesive body of work in a way. So if you think about Los Angeles, there is a clear school of work here. And you are part of that when you're here. In one way or another, you are. I always thought I would become a dean of a university. That I knew when I was in my teens year, even before I knew what I would study at university. But I never thought I would teach. I don't know why I thought that, but that was the case. I think I liked the idea of contributing to the creation of a culture. And I thought that education is the center of that. And I always thought my role was more of a larger vision and maybe more administrative. But I never thought of myself as being a studio teacher in contact with the students all the time. This happened to be the case. And maybe that's the only way really one could become the dean of a university. I didn't know when I started, and I think it was, it just became clear that if I wanted my own office, I also needed to have a place for experimentation in terms of thinking and a place that would nurture the younger Elena, which Sark did. So I think it came for me, teaching came for me as a support to my practice and to my cultural growth. But in general, I always wanted to have a role at the administration level of a university. I thought of that when I was in Italy, and I thought I would do that in the city where I come from, Bologna. So I thought, okay, this might gonna be I'm gonna be director of the University of Bologna. This is what I was thinking when I was 15. I never said this out loud, by the way. clearly I left, so that did not happen. But then I think many more things happened in my life. But so somehow I think administration at that level of university arrived in my life anyway. So there is always something that inspires my studios, and I usually teach vertical studios or core in the MR2 program, and they're both quite advanced in terms of technological interest and software development. So I feel like those parts are always at the underline of all the things I do. So there is an interest in technology and how technology can produce new forms of aesthetic. And clearly the topic change every year accordingly to what I think is maybe a typology of buildings that need to be rethought, or a way of seeing the world that has changed in my mind as well. So I think as architects, we collect culture. I mean, whether or not we understand it consciously, our role is the one to interpret life around us and bring this to a cohesive existence, which is a built environment. And I think we do that even in school. So many times the topic of the studio, yes, has one component, which is what I like to do at that moment in terms of technology and aesthetic, but I do think there is something always about the contemporary project of Los Angeles, or in general, a contemporary project that I think needs to be worked on. For instance, last year, I took on the idea of the office tower. During COVID, office towers became a very difficult typology to talk about. 2/3 of the buildings in downtown are unrented, and so it's difficult for developers to think of the most profitable machine invented by the United States as the one that you're going to build next. What do you do about that? And so that was one of the challenges for the students. Do we go higher or do we go lower? Does it still exist, the typology, in the future if COVID-19 continues? Do we see a post-pandemic world where this goes back to what it was, or do we actually understand this moment as a defining moment of transition for the skyscraper? And so usually there's always something that interests me to take on a project every year. And so that, that this fall I will work on, I think, on the private clubs. I think that also is a very interesting history, private club in the United States, and what it means nowadays after 1 year and a half of pandemic, after clearly everybody is on social media, why we have this rising of the social club in person, and why we try to reconnect in person through these devices that became not anymore about the creation of culture, but somehow venture capitals. Are these the new WeWork spaces of once upon a time? What do they mean? What is the problem of them in a moment where we're trying to be socially just, to see what has happened in Los Angeles, which means that social clubs have been actually on the rise. They're constructing and opening more and more of them. So there are these interesting topics, I think, that architects should be part of the discussion, because we are called to design those. We're called to design office towers. We're called to design these clubs, etc. I think engineering, I studied engineering in undergraduate, and when you go through that, you understand that technology is part of the profession of building buildings. And maybe that is what engineers are asked to do, to use and to leverage their intellectual power and their technologies towards the production of buildings. And I think that probably was the seed, that was the seed of that interest towards technology. Yeah. Also, I got educated in the years where computers really were a novelty. So I remember the pre-computer and the post-computer. So we're at the age where part of our education was ink on mylar, and part of the education was CAD drawing. So we were the transitional generation that had a traditional education and a complete digital education. And I think for that generation, computers were a method of disobedience. I think it was the divider between young and old generations, was the benchmark of position taking. And so it's impossible, I think, for people my exact age not to have a position about technology, because that was something we fought for. We fought for that adoption in the curriculum when we were students. There was a lot of resistance towards it, and we decided, no, this is actually the way in which the future will go, and we were right. It is the new normal. It's been the new normal for many years. But at that point, that was not a taken for granted. That was not something that one had to fight for it, basically. And we did fight for that. I think it does, and I think the appeal towards this tool is that it does allow for different aesthetics. So, I mean, at least for me, I mean, you can use it in many different ways, computers, but it's undeniable that the tool has an imprint on the project, on the product, on the outcome, on the possibility, on visualization, on our habit towards visualization, even towards our sense of order. I think has changed because we are in front of the computer all the time. The sense of order we had 25 years ago, this idea of abstraction and geometries are very different from the one we have today, where we are and have been in front of a screen for 25 years, looking at more and more and more complex system of geometries. And we control those system of geometries differently through coding, through softwares. It has completely changed the aesthetic expectation of architecture. Not only, I think social media even turned up the amp even more because it's not just a tool for the few, meaning it's not just a tool for the few architects, it's actually a tool that expands a series of images to a much, that exposes images to a much wider audience that suddenly participates in the making of the architectural imaginary. I think we are deeply underestimating the value of the image that has been propelled by tools like Instagram in architecture, and how those tools have changed the expectations and even allowed for a much more democratic understanding of architecture. I think if you thought about architecture 10 years ago, before Instagram, it was a black and white architecture. If you look at today, colors have exploded in internet in terms of what architectural images can and should be. We even have architecture that becomes a background to Instagrammers, and colors and architecture are actually fundamental physical background and canvases to those experiments. And this is something that architects are participating in, and not only architects are participating in that making of an imaginary. So now you look at schools of architecture and it's color is everywhere. 10 years ago, color was something that you needed to talk about. Why is this pink? No, so that, or why this is blue? And there were essay written about the chromophobic architects now having to deal with the computer allowing for shaders of different colors and different materials. Nowadays, this has exploded and has been exploding for a while. I think the computer has been the first big step towards color, because you're suddenly in front of palette of opportunities, and so you're starting to take shaders, attach shaders and materials and nodes, and you're like starting to make things that don't even exist in reality. So it's not just brick and concrete and wood. It's like, okay, I like this plastic, foam, glossy texture, etc., and that doesn't exist, but you make an image of desire, and then suddenly that becomes something that architects want to make. And there is an audience for that. That's the most important thing. If there is an audience for that, then you have a client. There is a way to go for it. And I think the computer has produced that, and social media has disseminated that. And so this is not just anymore me in front of my computer sharing this with a series of colleagues. This is everywhere now on Instagram. This is everywhere in everybody's imaginary. And you see then certain colors and drawings and images being projected onto walls, becoming the background of human inhabitation. So this is there is a theatricality that the computer has produced that went from the digital environment to the physical environment. The hardest thing is to surpass one's limitations. So you arrive to a point where you understand that certain things you don't do well and certain things you do very well, and how you work on the one you don't do well so that you become a better person. I think that's a never-ending process, and that's the hardest thing that one has to do. In general, I have moved from one country to another, which was not an easy task. I've done it without knowing. I did not know how hard it would have been. I'm not sure I would do it again. And so probably if you look at my life from far away, that was a brave moment that I dearly paid, but also gave me a lot of satisfactions in the making. Also, one thing that I learned was that, again, architecture is never an individual endeavor, and to let go of your individuality and understand that you're part of a community, which means something very important, that your expectations towards other people have to be different than the one you have for yourself, and that you have to become a person that allows other people to be the best they can so that the common good can be achieved. That is something that comes with age, I think. And it comes also with the role being different, the one of leadership rather than the one of ownership. That's very different, I think. And I'm glad I arrived to the point that I can see the value of an institution, of a community, and I find pride in the work of the many rather than in my personal work only. It's something that arrived with time, and I'm glad I'm at the point where I can look at my colleagues' work, my students' work, and be the champion